Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something we've all faced, something quiet, sharp, and heavy. Unfair criticism. Maybe it came from someone who barely knows you. Maybe it came in the form of a look, a tone, or words that cut more than they should have. Maybe it still echoes in your mind late at night. But tonight, you'll learn to face it the Stoic way, not by fighting it, but by seeing it for what it is. Something outside your control, something that cannot touch the essence of who you are. You will not be asked to forget, but you will be invited to let go. Remember, you will never be able to control the world, but you can always control how you meet it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting at a table, a familiar room, familiar silence. The person across from you has just spoken. You don't remember all their words, only how they made you feel, blamed, wronged, unfairly accused. You stare down at your hands, unsure whether to clench them or hide them. The mind races. How could they say that? Why do they think that? Should I defend myself or stay quiet? The moment expands like a ripple in still water. You sit inside that ripple now, and slowly you begin to see not just what was said, but what stirred inside you because of it. You remember Epictetus. He taught that it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And so you look again. The words, cold as they were, are just sounds, vibrations. The real weight, the burn in your chest, the flush in your face, that's yours. That came from your response. Strange, isn't it? That the pain didn't come from their mouth, but from your mind. You shift gently in your seat. No need to rush past this realization. You're not blaming yourself. You're just seeing clearly now. This is what a Stoic does, not numbness. Not indifference, but clarity. You take a breath deep into your belly, in and out. A small voice inside you whispers, they shouldn't have said that. Another voice asks, what if they were right? A third says nothing at all, only offers a deep, aching silence, the wish to be seen, to be understood. But none of these voices is your master. You do not have to obey the first surge of emotion. That's what the Stoics meant by freedom. Not the ability to do whatever you want, but the strength to choose how to respond. Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. You imagine him now, not as a statue, but as a tired man, worn from war and politics, writing by candlelight. Not because anyone told him to, not because it made him look wise, but because he needed to remember his own strength. Over and over. You see, even an emperor had to remind himself, this is not about them. This is about me. The unfair criticism, the harshness, the judgment, they are out there beyond your circle of control. But how you carry them inside you, that is your territory. Still, a part of you longs to explain yourself, to fix their perception. You want to rewind the moment, defend your intentions, set the record straight. But what if you didn't? What if you trusted that truth doesn't need to be shouted? What if your peace mattered more than their opinion? This isn't surrender. It's sovereignty. The kind you can't lose. You blink slowly and the memory begins to fade, not vanish, but dissolve into a kind of understanding. You don't have to relive it. You don't have to replay every line. You've met it now, faced it head on, and survived. Perhaps the person who criticized you was projecting their pain. Perhaps they misunderstood. Perhaps they were just careless. Or perhaps they were right. But either way, your soul remains untouched, unless you hand over the keys. You remember that time someone said something cruel in passing and you carried it for days. But also the time someone said something generous and you barely let it land. Why are we so open to injury and so resistant to grace? A small laugh escapes you. That's paradox number one tonight. The wounds we carry aren't always from sharp blades. Sometimes they're from our own need to be seen a certain way. And yet, that need isn't weakness. It's just human. You remind yourself you can want to be understood and still be okay when you're not. You can want fairness and still remain peaceful when life isn't. Outside, the night deepens. A fan hums softly. Shadows stretch like long thoughts across the ceiling. You sit with yourself, not as someone broken, but as someone learning. The Stoics didn't preach perfection. They practiced persistence. Over and over, they chose clarity over chaos, chose stillness over storms. You're starting to see now unfair criticism is not your enemy, it's your teacher, a mirror, a gate, an opportunity to return to yourself, not to your ego, but to your essence. You let your eyes close for a moment. The moment still lingers in memory, but it's not sharp anymore. It's quiet, a scene from an old play. You were a character, yes, but you're also the writer now, the director, the one who decides what meaning to make from it. And the meaning is this: you are more than what others say about you. You are more than your defense, more than your fear. You are capable of meeting judgment with presence. And silence, too, can be power. You sit with the memory just a little longer. Let it settle like silt at the bottom of a clear pond. The sharpness has dulled. What remains now is a shape, a presence, and the realization that you're still here, unbroken. The Stoics often compared the soul to a fire. It can burn steady or flare out. The emotions that rush in, anger, shame, resentment, they are sparks flying from a branch tossed in too quickly. They make noise, they leap, they distract. But they don't last, not unless you feed them. You feel the ember of anger still glowing faintly in your chest. That old instinct, defend, strike back, prove your worth. And then a whisper of awareness. You don't have to. You can choose something quieter, something stronger. A breeze moves through the window of your mind. Cool, calm. You watch the anger gently flicker, then fade, not forced out but no longer fanned. You recall the words of Seneca, though you don't need to quote him, just feel what he taught. That anger is a form of temporary madness, that it blinds more than it protects. There was a time when you thought fire was power, that showing your outrage was proof you were right. But now, you start to see a different kind of strength. The strength of the breeze. The kind that doesn't shout but moves mountains grain by grain. You picture a time in your life when you acted from that fire, when you snapped back, shouted louder, maybe even won the argument, but lost something quieter, your peace, your dignity, your time. Paradox number 2 tonight. Anger always feels like control right up until it controls you. You shift your weight slightly like a reed adjusting to the wind. No need to resist what is passing. No need to cling. You remember a story, not a grand one, just a small, true one. A friend who once told you they were angry at you. Caught off guard, your first impulse was to defend yourself. To explain, but something in you waited, just a moment, just long enough to listen instead. And in that breath of silence they softened. Their pain unfolded, and your anger never came. That wasn't weakness, that was a victory. Not of power over them, but of power over yourself. It's easy to be swept away by the current of our first emotions. But Stoicism teaches you to pause, to ask, is this useful? Is this necessary? Is this mine to hold? Most things, it turns out, are not. You think of a fire burning brightly in the center of an open plain. A breeze touches it, not to destroy it, but to guide its heat in a gentler direction. That's what your reason can be. Not a bucket of water, but a breath of space. Because you're not here to extinguish yourself. You're here to learn how to burn clean. Another memory floats in. A stranger online said something cruel. Their words carried no truth, but your heart still tensed. You checked their profile, reread their post, wondered who they were, why they'd say that. But now you realize, their words were never really about you. You were just the screen they projected their own storm onto. That's the third paradox tonight. Most unfair criticism reveals far more about the speaker than the target. You smile, not in mockery, in understanding. Someone else's bitterness does not require your reaction. You are not their mirror. You are not their echo. Instead, you return to yourself, to your breath, in and out. That's where your real life happens, not in the minds of others, not in imaginary arguments, but right here, in this simple, steady presence. You remember hearing once that you can't stop birds from flying over your head, but you can stop them from building a nest in your hair. Thoughts are like that. Emotions too, let them come, let them go. You don't have to believe every feeling that arrives. You don't have to act on every thought. This is the lesson of the breeze: feel everything, follow nothing. You're no longer the person who needs to prove their worth. You're the person who knows it quietly. And in that knowing, you find a rare kind of silence. Not emptiness, but peace. The kind that doesn't need to be explained, or defended, or liked. You recall again the fire in your chest. It's still there, but it's changed. Calmer, more focused. A warmth, not a blaze, a source of light, not destruction. You see now, the more unfair the criticism, the more sacred the pause. It's in that pause that character is shaped, not by reaction but by restraint. The world may be full of sparks, but you are no longer kindling. You are stone warmed by the sun. You absorb, you glow, you endure. And you begin to notice. What once felt like attack now feels like noise, background static. You're still here, breathing, thinking, choosing. A thought drifts in, light as a feather. What if I said nothing? And with it the strange taste of freedom. No defense, no apology, no performance, just this space, this steadiness. You are not frozen, you are not passive. You are practicing the most active discipline there is, the discipline of restraint, of not giving the world power over your interior state. Even now you feel the breeze in your breath, in and out, a rhythm older than thought, a rhythm no insult can break. You remember now the Stoics didn't promise life would be gentle, only that you could be. You are the breeze, not the fire. And yet you warm the world in your own quiet way. Let that be enough. The night has deepened. The breeze is steady. You've begun to feel a little further from the sting, and closer to something quieter, something more solid. But then comes another twist in the path. A question you hadn't expected. Why did it hurt so much in the first place? And there, in the gentle hush, you uncover something subtle, almost embarrassing to admit. It hurt because, on some level, you needed them to approve of you. You've been working not just to be good, but to be seen as good. You wanted them to say you did well. You're right. You matter. Praise, recognition, validation. The sweet music of approval. And when it didn't come, worse, when it was replaced with criticism, your chest tightened. Not just from the insult, but from the sudden silence where applause should have been. That's paradox number 4 tonight. We suffer more from the absence of praise than the presence of blame. You shift under the weight of this realization, not with shame, just with honesty. You've built parts of yourself around what others reflect back at you. We all do in ways big and small. A compliment feels like sunlight, a rejection like cold wind. But here's the thing, if you live by praise, you'll be broken by criticism. That's not Stoicism. That's slavery to impressions, to reactions, to moods that don't even belong to you. You pause and breathe. You remember how Epictetus taught that external things, what others think, say, reward, ignore, are not truly ours. That clinging to them is like trying to catch the sea in your hands. And you remember a moment, years ago maybe, when you did something kind, thoughtful, even brave, and no one noticed. No applause, no nod, no validation. But strangely, it still felt right. Clean, pure, yours. That moment was a clue. A sign that you're capable of acting with integrity, not performance. That your worth is not tied to the volume of the praise you receive. You think now of Marcus Aurelius again. He ruled the Roman Empire, yet wrote to himself as if he were a simple man trying to be decent. He warned himself. Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions. The emperor of the known world, reminding himself not to care too much what people think. So if he had to work on this, maybe you can forgive yourself for struggling with it too. You take another breath. Inhale. Exhale. You think back to how easily you've been swayed by compliments in the past, how a few kind words lifted you up, and how quickly you tried to repeat the behavior that earned them. But what if praise is also a kind of test, a sweeter poison, not because it's bad, but because it tempts you to live for the next dose? That's the 5th paradox tonight. Not all chains are heavy. Some are golden. Some even sound like applause. The Stoics taught that if someone praises you, it tells you something about them, what they value, what they notice, not necessarily something true about you. So instead of chasing more praise, you begin to ask, was I just? Was I wise? Was I kind? That's your new compass. Internal, silent, but unshakable. You remember a time when you made a difficult choice, one that wasn't popular. You stood by it even when it cost you approval. And deep down, even through the loneliness, you felt a strange pride. Not the loud kind, the steady kind. That's what it means to live with euthymia, a Stoic word meaning inner harmony, a mind in agreement with itself. You don't need the crowd to agree. You just need your soul to nod. You look again at the criticism that stung you. If it was unfair, why did it land so deeply? Because it didn't just go against your actions, it went against your identity. It threatened the version of you that you were trying to protect. But now, gently, you ask yourself, what if I stopped protecting that version? Not stopped being good, but stopped being seen as good? What freedom would open up if you no longer had to perform? You imagine it now. Doing the right thing without witness, without applause, without likes or comments, just because it's right. How light that feels. You remember a quote you once heard, paraphrased into your own thoughts. Live in such a way that you don't even need to explain yourself. You smile. That's the kind of invisible freedom the Stoics practiced. It's not indifference. It's independence. There's a difference. You take another breath, let it linger, then release. You can be praised today and slandered tomorrow. You can be admired in one circle and misunderstood in another. None of that touches who you really are unless you let it. That's the quiet gift of Stoic thought, the untangling of identity from reputation. You are not your image. You are not your echo. You are the stillness beneath it all. Even now, as you drift deeper into this quiet space, you can feel that part of you that no criticism can reach. It doesn't need to be named, just felt. And there, finally, is paradox number 6. When you no longer need approval, you become someone worth admiring, not because of the armor you wear, but because of the calm within you. And as the breeze moves gently across the inner flame, you feel the freedom of that calm. Let it stay. Let it grow. Let it guide you. Stillness wraps around you now like a soft blanket you forgot you already had. You're not pushing anything away, not reaching for anything new, just resting in the quiet center of yourself. But a new question begins to stir, faint at first, then clearer. What if the criticism wasn't entirely wrong? And there it is, that gentle discomfort. You've worked through the unfairness. You've set down the need for approval. But now comes the hardest part, seeing if there's a seed of truth hidden in the mud. The 7th paradox tonight, even your enemies might be your teachers. This doesn't mean you trust every voice, but you do listen, not out of fear but out of strength. Because the person who can face criticism without flinching is the person who has nothing to hide from themselves. You take a deep breath, let it in, let it out. You remember something small, a time when someone accused you of being distracted, unreliable, inconsistent. At first, your mind rushed to defend. They don't know what I'm dealing with. They don't see the full picture. And yet, weren't you avoiding something you didn't want to admit? A commitment you made but quietly dropped. A promise postponed so many times it became invisible. Not because you were bad, but because you were human, imperfect, in progress. The Stoics never asked you to be flawless, only to be honest. And honesty requires humility. You think of Socrates, who claimed to know nothing, not as a trick, but as a foundation. Because only from the stance of not knowing can we begin to see clearly. So now you revisit that criticism, gently, curiously, not as an enemy but as a mirror. What does it reflect? Even unfair mirrors can catch a sliver of truth in the right light. You pause and ask, if this person had a point, what might it be? It's a hard question, but also a liberating one. Because if you find something true, even a little, you now have a place to grow. And growth is one of the only true freedoms we ever get. You remember another story, not from a book, but from a quiet moment at work. A colleague offered a harsh remark, not cruel, just blunt. You always take over the meeting. like no one else can finish a sentence. It hurt deeply. You were trying to help, trying to move things along, trying to lead. But then later you watched a recording of the meeting, and there it was. You did speak over people. You did interrupt, not out of malice but out of habit. And when you saw it, the anger faded, embarrassment came, then humility, and then clarity. You changed, slowly, not completely, but enough that over time people opened up more. You noticed things you'd missed before, and you felt, finally, like a better version of yourself. Not because you'd silenced your voice, but because you'd learned how to listen. That's what self-examination can do, not shrink you but refine you. The Stoics called it ascesis, a form of training, not punishment but practice. You ask yourself now, what if criticism, even unfair criticism, is part of that training? You begin to see it differently, less like an attack, more like a forge, something hot, yes, but shaping. And what does it shape? Character. The person who can accept correction without defensiveness is rare, and becoming rarer. But you are on that path now, the one that leads inward, not to self-blame but to self-mastery. You remember how Epictetus said, in essence, when someone points out a flaw and you know it's true, don't argue. Say instead, you don't know the half of it. It's a joke, yes, but also a deep kind of power, the power of owning yourself completely. That's paradox number 8. You become untouchable when you stop pretending to be perfect. And in this way, criticism becomes something strange and beautiful, an invitation, a moment to re-meet yourself. You breathe in that possibility, deep, still, brave. This doesn't mean you accept every judgment. It means you become your own judge. You don't deny, you discern. You begin to ask better questions. Is there truth here? Is this something I've been avoiding? If I improved even one small thing, would I become more free? Because that's what Stoicism seeks, not virtue as a performance, but freedom as a result of virtue. You feel that now, not in grand gestures, but in small adjustments. A little more patience, a little more humility, a little more willingness to listen, even to voices you don't like. That's how a Stoic sharpens their edge, quietly, steadily. You remember again that criticism that once stung. You return to it now not with shame but with curiosity. And you realize something powerful. It doesn't define you, but it might refine you. There's a kind of strength in that, not loud, not aggressive, but deep, like roots growing in the dark. And you let that strength settle into your bones. The world will always offer opinions, some sharp, some shallow, but you're not here to collect them. You're here to transform what's useful and release what's not. Like a craftsman at the bench, discarding the warped wood but keeping the tools sharp. And you are becoming sharp, not harsh, sharp. The difference matters. You end this part of the journey not with conclusions but with questions. Questions you can carry into tomorrow. Questions that sharpen your vision without clouding your heart. Because the next time criticism comes, and it will, you'll meet it not with panic, not even with pride, but with poise. Because now you know. Even the harshest words can become raw material for something lasting. Not your identity, but your integrity. You shift your body slightly. The sheets rustle, your breath deepens. And something inside you is changing. Not loudly, not quickly, but with the slow strength of something that lasts. You've stepped beyond the fear of criticism. You've stepped beyond the hunger for praise. And now, you stand at a quiet crossroads. Who do you want to be when no one's watching? Because that's where Stoicism really begins, not in the marketplace of opinion, but in the solitude of choice. Tonight's 9th paradox drifts gently into view. You are most truly yourself when you act as if no one will ever know. You feel the edges of that idea settle in your chest. Think back. Think of all the little moments when you chose honesty over convenience, when you resisted the temptation to explain yourself too quickly, when you helped someone without slipping it into conversation later. Those weren't performances. They were acts of quiet alignment. Alignment between your inner sense of right and the outer world of action. And that alignment, that's integrity. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, just the still, unshakable kind. You breathe deeper now. The Stoics spoke often about living according to nature. But they didn't mean going barefoot or retreating into the forest. They meant living in accordance with your nature as a rational, moral being, which means acting from principle, not impulse, from understanding, not image. Marcus Aurelius asked himself often, am I doing this for show or for the right reasons? And you right now can ask the same. When you respond to criticism, is it about protecting your ego or refining your character? When you speak, is it to be admired or to be useful? When you're alone, do you still choose to be kind? You think now of a small story, one from the life of Cato the Younger, a Roman Stoic famous not just for his discipline but his consistency. They say he once wore the same simple cloak into the Senate every day, even though others mocked him. Why? Because it reminded him not to dress for approval but for function. It kept him from forgetting who he was beneath the robes. He wasn't trying to provoke. He was trying to remember. That's a powerful Stoic idea. Self-reminders as anchors, and you can have your own. Maybe it's the way you pause before replying. Maybe it's the notebook you keep by your bed. Maybe it's the short phrase you whisper under your breath when emotions swell. This is not who I want to be. Or maybe stay steady. Whatever your anchor, it's there to remind you. Your value doesn't come from others. It comes from how closely your actions match your inner compass. And yes, sometimes that compass will waver. Sometimes you'll lose your way. Sometimes you'll react instead of reflect. But that's okay. That's the 10th paradox tonight. Perfection is not required for integrity, only the effort to return to center. You think of a moment when you got defensive. Maybe today, maybe long ago, you snapped back, you shut down, you explained too much. You weren't proud of it, but now in the quiet of this space, you forgive yourself. Because awareness is already progress, and the desire to be better is a sign that you're already on your way. You breathe into that. You remember something Epictetus taught. First, tell yourself what kind of person you want to be. Then do what you have to do. That's it, no grand gestures, just the quiet shaping of life around a clear intention. So now you begin to define that for yourself. What kind of person do you want to be when you're criticized? Not perfect, but patient. Not immune, but composed, not afraid, but thoughtful. And above all, not performative, just real. This is where Stoicism becomes less about defense and more about design. You're designing the kind of mind you want to live inside. One that doesn't crumble under judgment. One that doesn't swell with flattery. One that remains simply upright. You imagine walking through a future conflict. Someone says something harsh. You pause, you notice the sting, you don't deny it. But then you choose. You choose to wait before responding. You choose to test their words against your own standards. You choose to act not out of spite but clarity. That choice is freedom. That choice is you. And here, in the deep hush of the night, you understand the Stoics weren't just preparing for battle or political life. They were preparing for the 1,000 invisible decisions of every day. How you treat a stranger, how you correct a mistake, how you breathe in silence. Those things, they add up. They create the shape of your soul. You're not trying to be liked. You're not trying to be perfect. You're just trying to be aligned, and that's more than enough. So tonight, you let that be your resting place, not a defense against criticism, but a return to intention. You are not your reputation. You are not your mood. You are not your mistakes. You are the one who chooses. And that power, quiet, firm, enduring, is always with you, even now. The night deepens and your breathing matches its rhythm, slow, steady, deliberate. You are no longer chasing the story. You are inside it, and it carries you gently like a slow-moving river. You've passed through the raw reaction to unfair criticism, beyond the ego's panic, beyond the impulse to strike back. You've walked through the uncomfortable mirror of self-inquiry, and now something shifts. You begin to sense that strange, quiet power. You don't have to respond at all. Tonight's 11th paradox is simple and disarming. Sometimes silence is the most disciplined reply. It isn't passivity, it's presence. It isn't giving up, it's letting go of what never belonged to you in the first place. You remember this now not as a theory but as a feeling. That one time you answered someone's sharp words with nothing but a calm gaze. How their energy, looking for friction, found none and collapsed under its own weight. It's the stillness of a mountain in the face of wind. You weren't weak. You were rooted. And that's what Stoicism offers. The ability to remain unchanged by what does not serve your purpose. You think of Marcus Aurelius again, writing in the dark, surrounded by political tension, physical illness, personal loss. And still he reminded himself, if you're not hurt, then you haven't been harmed. It's such a radical thought. If you're not hurt, then you haven't been harmed. Because what truly belongs to you, your judgment, your values, your choices, can't be touched by words alone. That doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you become the kind of person who doesn't hand over your peace for free. Tonight, you practice that. You think back to a recent moment when someone's comment lingered with you. Not because it was true, but because it hooked something. Your pride, your need to explain, your desire to be seen as good. And maybe you explained yourself. Maybe you typed out the perfect message. Maybe you defended your record, laid out the facts, offered context. And yet, did it free you? Or did it trap you further in the endless loop of justification? Now, lying still, you begin to see another way. The 12th paradox. You don't have to win an argument to walk away with your peace. It's a shift in posture, a recentering. You are not here to fight every battle, only the ones that shape your character. All others are noise. You imagine a fire burning. Criticism is a spark. You can choose to pour fuel on it or water or walk away. That choice, that's yours, always. The Stoics called it proherses, your faculty of choice, your inner authority. No one can take that from you. You breathe that in, and you think again of silence, not as absence but as a full presence, a kind of spiritual weight. Sometimes saying nothing is the clearest signal of strength. And sometimes, what you don't say says more about who you are than what you do. You remember a story from Seneca's life. A man insulted him publicly, trying to provoke a reaction. Seneca simply smiled, turned, and walked away. Later, when someone asked why he hadn't responded, he said, "I didn't have the time to get offended." It's not indifference, it's discernment. You don't owe your energy to everyone who demands it. And when you practice this kind of restraint, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel spacious inside, less crowded by noise, less reactive to storms, more attuned to your own rhythm. You remember now how much energy you've spent in the past trying to correct misunderstandings, how often you've replayed conversations, wishing you'd said more or less or something smarter, and you see clearly. That cycle ends not when the world understands you, but when you no longer require it to. Because the deeper truth, you already know who you are. And if you don't, no amount of external approval will make it clear. That's why the Stoics weren't obsessed with image. They were obsessed with essence. So now you sit with that question not from fear but from curiosity. What is the essence of who I am? You don't need to answer right away. Just listen. Let the question rest in your chest like a warm stone. You're not running anymore. You're not explaining. You're not defending. You are here. You are quiet. You are whole. You let the silence deepen, not empty, full. And you think again of the metaphor of the archer, a favorite among Stoics. The archer prepares, trains, aims, releases. But once the arrow has left the bow, it's no longer theirs to control. The wind might change. The target might move. None of that is up to them. Their only task is to shoot well. And yours tonight is the same. Do your part. Aim your intentions. Live by your values. And then let go. Let go of how others receive you. Let go of what they say in return. Let go of the noise. Because your peace is not built from control. It's built from clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It whispers, like this night, like your breath. Like the soft reminder echoing through you now, you don't need to react to everything. Some things are better left unmoved. Like you turn slowly, letting your body settle deeper into stillness. No tension now, only presence. And in that presence, a question echoes softly. What if they're right? Tonight's 13th paradox arrives like a quiet visitor. You can learn from criticism, even when it's unfair. It sounds counterintuitive, even insulting. Why should you entertain the words of someone who misunderstood you, or who meant to harm? But the Stoics invite you into a deeper humility, not the self-deprecating kind, but the spacious kind. The kind that allows you to hold both truth and error without panic. And so tonight, we explore that most delicate Stoic art, extracting wisdom from imperfection. You think now of Epictetus, who reminded his students, if someone accuses you of something and it's false, be glad they don't know the rest. There's a quiet humor in that, a wink at the absurdity of human pride. Because truthfully, if someone criticizes you unjustly, they've only seen a sliver of your flaws. You know the full picture, and still you stand. That too is strength. You recall a moment from your past, maybe recent, maybe long buried, when someone's critique stung you. It felt untrue, even mean. But now, with time and space, you see, a fragment of truth was hidden inside the harshness. Maybe your timing was off. Maybe your words did come across poorly. Maybe your effort, though sincere, was incomplete. And maybe, not certainly, but maybe, that moment was a chance to refine, not retreat. That's the Stoics' approach. You take the stone that was thrown and you carve it into a stepping stone. You don't ignore pain. You investigate it. You don't silence criticism. You sieve it. You don't become ashamed. You become aware. Because awareness is always the beginning of freedom. Think now of Marcus Aurelius again, the most powerful man in Rome, yet every night he wrote as if he were just a student. In his meditations, he reviewed his mistakes, reminded himself to do better, forgave his failings. No audience, no praise, just practice. And that's what you're doing here too, not defending your record, just practicing self-examination with gentleness and rigor. There's another paradox here, number 14 if you're counting. The people who hurt you may unknowingly help you grow. That doesn't excuse cruelty. It doesn't glorify abuse. But it does return your power. You don't have to wait for kindness to learn. You don't have to agree to extract insight. You just need a calm heart and a curious mind. You think of a conversation now, one that still makes your stomach tighten. They misunderstood you, judged you harshly. You tried to explain, but it didn't land. And yet, was there something useful in their view? Not in how they said it, but in what they revealed. Maybe a blind spot, maybe a habit, maybe a pattern you hadn't noticed. You don't have to believe everything people say about you. You only have to ask, is any part of this true? And if the answer is yes, even a small part, then you found a gift inside the insult. You smile just slightly at the thought, because suddenly the world becomes a teacher. Even your critics, especially your critics, you begin to see that unfairness doesn't rob you of value. It reveals where you're still reactive, where you still need external confirmation, where the ego still twitches. And once you see that, you're free to change, not to please others, to align deeper with your principles. You think of a sculptor now, hammer and chisel in hand, not angry at the stone, just patient, focused, removing what is not needed. That's your work too. Criticism, fair or not, is just the next tap of the chisel. You don't flinch, you listen, you adjust. This is not submission, it's creation. And slowly, gently, you shape the kind of person you want to be. Someone who doesn't fear being wrong. Someone who doesn't need to be seen as perfect. Someone who prefers truth over comfort, even when it arrives wrapped in thorns. You take another breath. And here comes the 15th paradox. Growth requires both sunlight and shadow. You need affirmation, yes, encouragement, compassion. But you also need friction, need tension, need the discomfort of being seen in ways you didn't intend. Because that's where real self-knowledge begins, not in curated reflection, but in the messy, unpredictable mirror of relationship. So now, you welcome it all. You open to feedback, not because it's always accurate, but because it's always revealing. You respond with curiosity, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You remain steady, not because you're cold, but because you've found your anchor. And in that anchor, you discover the final paradox of this section. The more you accept your flaws, the less they control you. You're not pretending anymore. You're not performing. You're not perfect. You are present, and in that presence, in this silence, something opens. You let it. A gentle breeze outside. The faint creak of the night. You breathe in, softer now, deeper. The air feels cooler. The quiet inside your chest wider. And in this widened space, something surprising appears. Not resistance, not even acceptance, but gratitude. You feel it start in your stomach, then rise. Thank you. Not to anyone in particular. Not even for something tangible. Just thank you. Tonight's 16th paradox reveals itself. Gratitude can bloom even in the soil of criticism. It's not forced, not naive, not the kind of gratitude that denies pain or pretends things don't hurt. It's a deeper, quieter recognition that every challenge, yes, even the unfair, sharp-edged ones, has shaped you. You think back to an old version of yourself, maybe younger, maybe last year. You remember how easily one comment could ruin a whole day, how you'd replay the words, build imaginary counterarguments, try to win in your mind. But now, you see that those moments taught you how to return to yourself. You learned little by little that no one's opinion defines your worth. And more than that, you learned that your reactions aren't permanent. They're habits, and habits can be reshaped. This is the Stoics' invitation. Not to deny pain, but to transmute it. Not to silence your emotions, but to guide them wisely. Think of the blacksmith again. Fire and hammer. He doesn't resent the heat, he uses it. And so do you. Every time you breathe instead of lash out. Every time you pause instead of post. Every time you let someone else be wrong about you and still choose peace. That's not weakness. That's discipline. You remember the story of Cleans, the Stoic who once carried water in the streets of Athens all night just to afford philosophy lessons. People mocked him, laughed at him, called him foolish. He didn't fight back. He kept walking. And years later, when he taught his own students, he would say, "The things that humiliate you now might someday become your strength, because you never know what part of your struggle is preparing you for something you can't yet imagine." You feel that now, a tender strength growing where wounds once were, and with it the 17th paradox: the more you're hurt and heal, the more compassion you can hold. You start to see your critics not as enemies but as confused teachers. They point clumsily, maybe even cruelly, to something they think they see, and sometimes they're wrong, but sometimes they point towards something unhealed in them, something unloved, something you might even share. And just like that, you soften. Not out of obligation, out of insight. You realize that everyone at some level is carrying their own story, their own unmet needs, their own unseen wounds. And some of that spills out as judgment. Some of it becomes sharp. And when it touches your own raw places, it stings. But instead of closing, you stay open. Instead of defending, you observe. Instead of retreating, you remember. You are not fragile. This is not detachment, it's presence without fear. And in this presence, gratitude has room to breathe. You feel grateful for your progress, grateful for the chance to see your patterns, grateful for the people who, knowingly or not, helped you practice your values. That doesn't mean they were right. It means you rose to the moment, and that's enough. You begin to understand now why Stoicism is so often misunderstood. It's not cold. It's not emotionless. It's rigorous love for truth, for integrity, for reality. And reality isn't always kind, but it's always yours to navigate. Here comes the 18th paradox, floating through like a feather. The person who unjares you the most may be your greatest test and teacher, not because they're wise, but because they reveal the boundary between your ideals and your instincts, between who you want to be and who you still become under stress. And that tension, that's sacred. That's the edge of your becoming. You sit with that thought now. Feel its weight. No rush to resolve it. No need to fix anything tonight. Just let it settle into the rhythm of your breath, the quiet of your room. Maybe you think of someone specific, a critic, a voice from your past, a name that still echoes. And maybe, just maybe, you whisper thank you, not for the pain they caused, but for the way it taught you to return to yourself, to grow your patience, to reclaim your peace. You feel a softening in your chest, an unclenching. And from that comes the final paradox for tonight: Number 19. Peace isn't what you find when things are quiet. It's what you choose when they're not, even when misunderstood, even when judged, even when the world seems loud and wrong and tilted against you. Still, you can breathe. Still, you can thank the moment. Still, you can return to your center. And you do, now, here, grateful not that it's easy, but that you're capable. The room is still. You haven't moved much, just enough to notice how your body fits the quiet. Your breath, now a familiar rhythm. Your mind, softened around the edges. And something is shifting in the background of your awareness. Like a door you didn't know was there, slowly creaking open. You step through, into a space beyond defense. Tonight's 20th paradox glides in like mist. You do not need to explain yourself to be free. You feel the pull, of course. The urge to be understood, it's human, ancient. We all want our intentions seen clearly, our goodness confirmed. But the Stoics ask, is that truly yours to control? The answer, whispered through centuries, is no. No matter how carefully you choose your words, how calmly you explain, how kindly you behave, someone somewhere will misinterpret you. So you have a choice. You can keep chasing approval, chasing clarity, chasing perfect alignment. Or you can pause and ask, who am I without their understanding? That question doesn't close you off. It opens you up. Because the 21st paradox is this: letting go of being understood may bring you closer to your true self. You remember a conversation, perhaps recent, perhaps from long ago, when you tried everything to clarify. You were patient. You were thoughtful. And still the other person heard something else entirely. It was frustrating, disheartening, maybe even infuriating. But now in this quiet space you see it differently. You see that their perception was shaped by their fears, their past, their filters, just like yours is. And suddenly the pressure lifts. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to fight it. You just need to remain aligned with your own principles. That's all. You think of Seneca now, his letters from exile, where he continued to write, to teach, to reflect. Not because people were listening, but because he was. He didn't shout over the sea of misunderstanding. He simply carved his truth into the silence. So can you. There's a power in quiet integrity, in doing what's right, not for praise, not for defense, but because it's who you are. You begin to feel that now, a subtle shift in your spine, in your sense of self. A confidence not loud or boastful, but steady. You don't need to rush to clarify your worth. You don't need to plead your case. You are not a brand, not a reputation, not a storyline to be managed. You are a presence. And that presence deepens when it no longer fears being misread. Here, the 22nd paradox blooms gently. Being misjudged can be the beginning of real inner freedom. It feels almost rebellious. In a world obsessed with image, you choose truth. In a world built on narratives, you choose silence. Not as a retreat, but as a stance. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because the less you need from others, the more you can give freely. You remember now a quiet moment, not dramatic, not big. Maybe you held your tongue. Maybe you walked away. Maybe you chose peace over vindication. It didn't feel like victory then, but it was. You preserved your energy. You protected your focus. You honored your own direction. That is not small. That is mastery. You take a deep breath and feel a flicker of humor rise. Tonight's 20th paradox is surprisingly light. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves to think about you. It's absurd, isn't it? How much time we spend worrying what others think, when most of the time they're wondering what we think of them. So much noise, so little meaning. You smile at the irony, and in that smile the tension dissolves. You don't need to keep checking the mirror of public opinion. You know who you are, at least well enough to keep walking forward. And when you falter, you return to breath, to silence, to principle. That's the Stoic loop, not perfection but return, not image but essence, not applause but alignment. You let that settle into your body now, like warmth, like a fire that no longer needs tending. It simply burns, steady and quiet. And so you give yourself this permission to be misunderstood, to be underestimated, to be wrong in someone else's story, and still to be free. Because your freedom does not come from how others see you. It comes from how you hold yourself when they don't. There's a deepening now, like the descent from twilight into true night. You notice the weight of the blanket on your body, the stillness of the room. Even your thoughts seem to be whispering. And in that hush, a quiet truth emerges. Tonight's 24th paradox is soft but unmistakable. When you stop defending yourself, you finally meet yourself. For so long, you've been trying to be understood, to be seen in the right light, to explain who you are and why you are. But here now, in this dark and quiet moment, you realize the one person who truly needs to see you is you. And that maybe, just maybe, you've been standing in the way of that all along. Think of it like a lake. When it's stirred by defense, by reaction, by anxiety, it's cloudy. You can't see to the bottom, but when you let the surface settle, you begin to see, not just reflections, but depth. The Stoics weren't interested in appearances. They knew those came and went. They cared about something deeper, the kind of person you become when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when the world misunderstands you and you choose to stay true. That's character. And character, unlike reputation, is built in silence. You remember a moment, one that felt small then, maybe invisible to others, when you chose integrity over validation. Perhaps you stayed kind when insulted. Perhaps you owned your mistake instead of hiding it. Perhaps you let someone else be right, even when you knew the truth. That wasn't weakness. That was clarity, and now that clarity returns. You think of Marcus Aurelius, writing alone at night in his tent while his empire was at war. Surrounded by pressure, betrayal, uncertainty, and still, he wrote reminders to himself like soft commands: be humble, be patient, be unaffected by praise and blame. He didn't need the world to understand him, he needed to understand himself. So do you. The 25th paradox lands gently. The less you need from others, the more you have to give them. There's a strange joy in it. Not cold, not removed, but warm, spacious, open. You no longer demand that people praise you, validate you, or get you, so you can actually listen. You can actually see them without the filter of your own insecurity. You can offer kindness that isn't strategic, forgiveness that isn't transactional, and that, quietly, steadily, changes everything. You recall a time you were unfairly criticized. It stung. Maybe it still does in some echoing part of your memory. But now you see, what they said hurt less than how much you wanted to correct it. What if you hadn't needed to? What if you had just let it float by like a leaf on the surface of that lake, not out of apathy but out of self-possession? That's the 26th paradox. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. No response. No defense. Just silence. You're not ignoring the situation. You're respecting your own peace more than someone else's chaos. You let that realization rest in your body now. Feel it settle behind your ribs, between your shoulders, deep in your gut. There's a strength here you hadn't noticed before, not the kind that clenches, the kind that softens, because you've realized something that can't be unseen. You don't have to chase the version of you that lives in someone else's mind. That's a moving target, and it's never really you. Instead, you return again and again to your values, your breath, your still point. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not a lack of feeling, but a discipline of presence. A way to hold your center when the world pushes. And tonight, in this slow descent into stillness, you hold it well. Maybe for the first time in a while. Or maybe just a little more gently than before. Either way, that's enough. And here comes the 27th paradox, arriving like a closing bell. The world will try to make you react, but you can choose to respond. You don't have to join every argument. You don't have to meet every attack with explanation. You don't even have to be right. You just have to be real, grounded, present, and tonight you are, so breathe again. Let go of that last name, that last face, that last phrase that still echoed in your mind. Let it dissolve. You've seen it for what it was, not truth, not prophecy, just noise. And you are something deeper. You're the calm beneath the current, the clarity beneath the story, the light that doesn't need to prove itself. You settle into that now, and stay there. You're further in now. The world beyond your walls feels distant, like a dream half remembered. What remains is the steady pulse of stillness, a silence so whole it hums, and into that space another layer unfolds. Tonight's 28th paradox: to truly let go of unfair criticism, you must first admit how much it stings. You've probably heard it said, "Don't let it bother you." But the Stoics, true Stoics, never asked you to pretend. They didn't ask you to wear masks of indifference, to stuff down your pain, to walk away pretending it didn't matter. They asked for something braver. They asked for honesty. So let's be honest. It hurts when someone twists your words. It hurts when your intentions are doubted. It hurts to be misunderstood, especially when you've done your best to be clear, to be kind, to be real. And that's okay. Let it hurt. Let yourself feel that strange heat in your chest, that prickling at the edge of your eyes, that tightening in your throat. Don't dramatize it. Don't run from it. Just witness it. Because in that witnessing lies power. That's what Epictetus meant when he said, "It's not things that disturb us but our judgments about them." And your judgment right now is simple, honest. This hurts. And that's all. Not "this means I'm a failure." Not "this means they're terrible." Just "this stings." And then you breathe and let it pass. The way a wave rolls in cold and sharp and then rolls back out, leaving only foam and sand. The 29th paradox arrives quietly. Resisting pain extends it. Accepting it shrinks it. So you sit with the discomfort, and it changes. It doesn't disappear, but it transforms. From something heavy to something informative. From something personal to something universal. Because everyone, yes, everyone knows the sting of being misunderstood. You're not alone, not even close. And in that, there's a kind of relief. A sense of joining the long line of humans who have stood where you stand, breathed what you breathe, and kept going anyway. You think of Cato the Younger, Stoic statesman, often criticized, ridiculed even, for his unwavering principles. He never shouted back. He never lobbied for affection. He simply kept living according to his values, even when it cost him dearly. That wasn't detachment. That was commitment. He didn't erase his humanity to be stoic. He honored it and made choices in spite of it. You feel that now. A choice forming quietly inside you, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the subtle kind, like choosing to unclench your jaw, choosing to exhale, choosing to let go, not of the memory, but of the story you've wrapped around it. The one that said, "If they don't understand me, I must be broken." No, you are not broken. You are learning. You are becoming. And tonight, in this vast quiet, you are healing. The 30th paradox touches down like soft rain. To become less reactive, you must allow yourself to react privately, honestly, and briefly. That's the Stoic way, not suppression. Transmutation. You take the raw material of hurt and you turn it slowly, steadily into wisdom, into resolve, into clarity. You don't broadcast your pain. You don't weaponize it. You use it as a mirror to ask better questions, to see your ego more clearly, to know where your identity has been resting and whether it still belongs there. That is how criticism becomes useful, not when it's fair, but when you respond to it fairly. You think back now to the last time you were hurt by someone's words and notice what the pain revealed. Where were you still needing approval? Where were you still building identity on someone else's perception? Where were you still asking the world to validate what you already knew? You smile a little at the answer, not because it was silly, but because it was so deeply human. And now you begin to thank the moment, not for its cruelty, but for its clarity. That's the 31st paradox. The people who misunderstand you most deeply are sometimes the ones who show you who you truly are. Not through agreement, but through resistance. Not through support, but through pressure. And still you stay. Here. Breathing, grounded, untouched at the core. Because that's the final truth of this section. Nothing they say, however loud, however cruel, can touch the part of you that chooses how to respond. That part is yours. It's sacred. And it is, now more than ever, awake. The room is quieter than before, if that's even possible. Even your breath seems lighter now, like it no longer drags through the chest but floats on air. You've been peeling back so many layers and still, there's more softness waiting underneath. Tonight, another truth comes into focus. not with a flash but like light slowly gathering at dawn. Here it is. You are not who they think you are. You're not even who you think you are. You are who you choose to become. It sounds simple, maybe even vague, but when you sit with it, it unlocks something. You've spent years, maybe decades, shaping your identity. Some of it consciously, some unconsciously, trying to be someone, trying to live up to expectations, or trying to break free from them. And along the way, other people have formed their own pictures of you, sometimes loving, sometimes accurate, sometimes cruel. You've tried to correct those pictures, tried to explain yourself, clarify, rebrand, but tonight that urge softens. Because you realize none of those images can hold the whole of you, not theirs, not even your own. So you let them fade. You begin instead to ask, what kind of person do I want to be when no one's looking? That's a Stoic question, not how do I come across, but what kind of life do I live when applause disappears? You think now of Musonius Rufus, one of the lesser-known Stoics, but a giant in the realm of practice. He taught that philosophy isn't about reading or talking, it's about action, about training. He told his students to focus less on status and more on virtue, less on opinions, more on daily habits. He was exiled, insulted, ignored, and he kept teaching. He kept living the way he believed a wise person should live, not for praise, for peace. You feel that now somewhere in your chest, behind the rib cage, a small, quiet bell. The desire to simplify, to step away from proving, to walk toward becoming. That's the 30-second paradox. Self-respect matters more than self-expression. We live in a world that encourages us to be ourselves, loudly, unapologetically, constantly. But the Stoics ask something deeper. Not be yourself, but be your best self. Not speak your truth, but live it quietly and consistently. And when the criticism comes, and it will, you already know who you are. You don't need to panic. You don't need to retreat into silence or lash out in defense. You can simply continue. That's the 33rd paradox. When you stop trying to fix your image, your character becomes unshakable. You recall a recent moment, maybe even from this week, when someone misunderstood you. Maybe they questioned your intentions. Maybe they criticized your choices. Maybe they gave you a look that said, I don't get you. And for a moment, you felt that old surge. The impulse to correct, to explain, to prove you're thoughtful, kind, fair, but something inside paused, not frozen, just anchored. And that pause, however brief, was sacred. Because it reminded you, you don't owe everyone an understanding of you. You owe yourself clarity. And you owe the world your example, not your explanation. That's the Stoic path. It isn't cold. It isn't detached. It's simply grounded in what you control. Your actions, your intentions, your chosen response. And in that clarity, you find a strange, quiet joy. You're not as fragile as you feared, not as dependent on praise, not as defined by perception. You are slowly, beautifully detaching from the need to be known and rooting yourself in the act of being. Being thoughtful, being steady, being free. You settle deeper into the blanket now, your limbs heavier, your breathing slower. The body knows even before the mind does, you're safe here. You're aligned. Tonight's 34th paradox arrives like a gentle wave. Letting go of your image is the beginning of real confidence. Not the loud kind, not the glittery kind, but the kind that says, I'm okay if they don't see me clearly because I do. You think now of the ancient sculptors, carving forms from stone, not by force, but by removing everything that didn't belong. Maybe that's what you're doing, slowly chipping away the noise, the ego, the performances, until what remains is simple, true, unmistakable. Not what others said you were, not even what you once believed, but what you've chosen again and again through every breath of silence and restraint and courage. That's your true self. And you are meeting them now. You're almost surprised by how still you feel. Not numb, no, the opposite, present, light. As if some great inner knot has finally begun to loosen. Not undone in a single moment, but in tiny, invisible motions. The way grass bends to wind. The way mountains weather down into wisdom. This is the kind of stillness you earn. And tonight it gives rise to another reflection. The 35th paradox: the more deeply you accept others' flaws, the less power their criticism holds. This one isn't obvious. After all, when people wrong you, when they mock or dismiss or misinterpret you, the reaction isn't softness, it's heat, defense, sometimes even spite. But the Stoics saw things differently. They looked at insult not as an act of war, but as a symptom, an error in judgment, a lack of wisdom. You think of Marcus Aurelius again, writing in his journal not to impress but to survive his own mind. He reminds himself almost daily, people will lie, people will misunderstand, people will act unjustly, not because they're evil but because they don't know better. And so he forgives them, not because he's a saint, but because he doesn't want to be dragged down. He doesn't want to give away his peace. You feel that now, how criticism, even when unfair, reveals something, maybe not about you, but about them, their state of mind, their fears, their expectations, their blindness. And when you see that clearly, the sting fades, because it was never really about you. You were just the screen onto which their inner drama was projected. That's the 36th paradox. Taking things personally makes you a prisoner. Taking things impersonally makes you powerful. You remember now a moment from years ago, someone snapped at you, criticized you in public, said something small but sharp, and you held on to it for days. Not because the words were true, but because you felt violated, exposed, unjustly judged. But what if you had simply let it pass? What if you had seen them not as an enemy, but as someone caught in their own storm? Wouldn't that have freed you, not just from them, but from the trap of needing constant fairness? That's what the Stoics teach. Not how to be invincible, but how to be untangled. How to walk through a world full of confusion and noise and still hear your own inner clarity ringing, steady as a bell. You breathe deeper. You feel the weight of expectation, of needing to be seen as right, smart, good, slowly slipping off your shoulders. And with it comes a softness. Yes, even toward those who have hurt you. That doesn't mean you excuse them. It means you understand what they could not. That's the 37th paradox. Sometimes the person who wrongs you most is the one in greatest need of your calm example. This is not about being superior. It's about being sovereign. Sovereignty, for the Stoics, was the real seat of power, not ruling others but ruling oneself. And what better test of that rule than when you're unfairly criticized? It's easy to be composed when praised, but when your character is questioned, that's when your true strength is revealed. And you are stronger than you once believed. You feel it in your muscles, even as they relax. You feel it in your chest, even as it rises and falls in peace. This isn't confidence that demands to be seen. This is confidence that glows quietly from within. You think of a tree in winter, bare, silent, but alive, roots deep in the earth, unbothered by the wind's opinion. That's what you're growing into, and in that stillness one more truth arises, the 38th paradox. You don't need everyone to understand you, only you need to, that's it. That's the release. You no longer carry the burden of convincing, correcting, or controlling how others see you. You simply live, you simply are. And the more you align with that, the more those around you begin to sense it, even if they can't name it. They see your steadiness. They feel your restraint. They notice the calm in your choices. And maybe, just maybe, they begin to reflect. That's the secret. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you become the kind of person others trust without needing explanation. So tonight, in the quiet of your own breath, you let go again. Of that last retort you wanted to say. Of the imaginary argument you've replayed for days. Of the invisible court you've stood before pleading your case. You step out of it all and step back into yourself. Into this moment, this stillness, this freedom. You've earned it. And now you dwell in it. The air around you feels different now, thinner, softer, somehow more alive. Not because anything outside has changed, but because something inside has finally settled. What remains is not emptiness, but space. Space to see more clearly, to breathe more deeply, to respond more wisely. You didn't ask for the unfairness, but you've turned it into something sacred, a practice ground. And now you're approaching one final paradox. The 39th paradox. Sometimes silence is not surrender, it is mastery. You used to think silence was weakness. That if someone hurt you and you didn't respond, it meant you had lost. That staying quiet meant you had no defense. But you see it differently now. Silence, when chosen with clarity, can be the purest act of strength. It says, I am not controlled by you. I do not need to perform for your approval. I have nothing to prove. That kind of silence is rare. Not passive, not afraid. It's the silence of someone who knows themselves so well they don't flinch when misunderstood. It's the silence of a mind that no longer needs the last word. You recall a moment not so long ago when someone accused you unfairly, perhaps in a meeting or a family conversation, or online where faces blur into usernames and tone becomes a weapon, and you wanted to reply, to defend, to explain, but something inside you paused. You listened, you breathed, and you chose silence, not because you didn't care, but because you cared more about your peace than about their perception. And in that moment, you tasted a kind of power that doesn't roar, it simply remains. That's what Epictetus meant when he taught that no one can truly harm you unless you let them into your judgment. The insult, it's just sound. The opinion, just wind. Unless you grab hold of it, take it in, and make it part of yourself. But you didn't. You saw it pass, like a bird flying across the sky, leaving no trace. That's the 40th paradox. You don't become stronger by fighting everything. You become stronger by choosing what deserves your energy. And most things don't. The Stoics weren't pacifists, but they were choosy about their battles. They knew the cost of reaction, the weight of resentment, the trap of being constantly offended. They sought to live above it, not out of arrogance, but out of a devotion to inner freedom. You feel that now, a kind of emotional minimalism, like you're carrying less anger, less performance, less need to be seen as right. And that, strangely, gives you more room for compassion, even toward those who have hurt you. That's the 41st paradox. Once you stop needing revenge, you regain your ability to feel love. It's not sentimental. It's not naive. It's rooted in the understanding that most people are not evil, they're just asleep. Asleep to their motives, asleep to their habits, asleep to the ripples of harm they leave behind. You don't have to wake them up. You don't have to punish them. You just have to stay awake yourself. You think now of Seneca, who wrote often about how to deal with insults. His advice wasn't to counter them, but to elevate above them, to consider them a test of one's spirit. He wrote, "If you want to be admired, begin by being indifferent to admiration." It sounds harsh, but in practice it's liberating. You feel it now, don't you? The freedom of not needing anything from your critics, not an apology, not agreement, not even respect. Because your dignity doesn't come from their words, it comes from your conduct. That's the Stoic path. Not rigid, not joyless, but deeply alive, rooted in choice, bathed in awareness. And as you lie here, your thoughts moving slower now, your breath fuller, you notice something subtle. You no longer carry the edge of defensiveness in your chest. You're not on guard. You're not waiting to be misunderstood. You're just here, intact, whole, at ease. The kind of quiet you've been craving isn't something that comes after the noise fades. It comes when you stop needing to shout over it. It comes when your presence is louder than your reaction. And in that presence, in that inner space, you remember the final paradox of tonight, the 42nd paradox. When you stop trying to prove you're right, you begin to live rightly. And living rightly is its own reward. No applause needed, no spotlight. Just the quiet strength of being who you are, where you are, with peace as your companion. Let it be enough. Let it be everything. You've come a long way. Not just through the thoughts or the stories or the stillness, but through yourself. Through the inner territory most people avoid. That sacred place where discomfort lives beside clarity, where wounds sit beside wisdom, where your peace is not borrowed from the world, but made slowly from within. Tonight, you arrive at the soft edge of one final lesson. The 43rd paradox. The most powerful self is the one that no longer needs to be defended. There's something profoundly disarming